Electric Ghost. Then we're live on the air with Umay, and we've had her on before, and we're going to talk to her about her latest projects. We've got a cool video that she's got that we're going to get into for Midnight Train. We do have to mention our sponsor. We are sponsored by Newsly, and this podcast will be on Newsly within an hour. So you can use coupon code GHOST and get 1 month free premium subscription and stop scrolling and start listening. So it's great to have you back on. So how have you been?
Yeah, it's great to be back. I've been fine, just working on a lot of music.
Yeah, do you find that you spend more time writing, or you're actually working on a lot of different things? Have you performed lately, or are you primarily just like writing in a writing mode?
I haven't performed as much as I used to. I still try to do it as much as I can, both through social media and also through local pubs and clubs. But for the most part, the focus has been on the writing.
Yeah, writing. Because of the pandemic, I spent a lot of time writing, and I've talked to a lot of musicians that we kind of had the space to do something that maybe a lot of times artists we don't, because like musicians we typically have to tour because the way the industry doesn't pay us, so we have to do shows and we have to do merch, we have to do all these things. They kind of take away from writing. And so this time, I know it's been tragic for a lot of people, but I spent a lot of time being able to write. So did you find that that's why you were writing, or do you had the motivation because you had a project you wanted to work on anyway?
I think the pandemic and the lockdown, just not having anything else to do, was a big push for me to focus on writing more. And also, it was around the end of the pandemic, actually, that I decided, because I had this project in my head for a really long time, to write a musical. And then finally, at the end, I was determined and I said, okay, I'm going to do it because I don't know when this pandemic is going to end. So I may as well just get started on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a really ambitious idea. It's like, I think a lot of people today are kind of like, how are we going to connect with the audiences? Like, a lot of times we have to use visuals. People are using TikTok, they're using Reels, and then going into the idea of like theater. Even go back to the Who with Tommy. They were like, oh, we can do rock opera. We can do this multimedia thing. We don't have to just do hit singles. And actually, it was kind of like P Town was running into a wall. It was like, I can't keep on writing singles. I'm not really a singles artist. I'm a concept artist. So did you feel like, because you like albums and you like the idea of a play, that fit better what you like to write about anyway as a musician?
Yeah, I think I really like the idea of writing a long piece rather than just one single, because I feel like when you're writing a play like that, then you can do a lot more with the lyrics and the music, because then you can also refer back to previous melodies or lyrics and tell the story a lot better in that way, something that a single couldn't do.
Yeah, I've always liked the album format. I've gone on and on being a child of the 70s, grew up with vinyl. When I approached an album, because I put it on the turntable, I didn't jump around. I didn't just listen to a playlist. I listened to the whole thing through. And I like the idea when people have albums, even if they're not a concept, they usually have songs that go together. And it's really, I always was very interested in albums that did have themes. So the idea of having a project, actual like a play, is actually really, so maybe you can talk more about that. But I do have your single. So before we get deeper into that, I will bring that up so we can actually show everybody what your latest song is. So I'm going to pull that up now and set it up. And then once we're going to play the full length of it, and then we'll go into, I'll put you on mute and we'll go back and talk about the theater project. Is that cool?
Yep. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So this is Midnight Train. Kick it off now. Electric Ghost. Then we're live on the air with Umay, and we've had her on before, and we're going to talk to her about her latest projects. We've got a cool video that she's got that we're going to get into for Midnight Train. We do have to mention our sponsor. We are sponsored by Newsly, and this podcast will be on Newsly within an hour. So you can use coupon code GHOST and get 1 month free premium subscription and stop scrolling and start listening. So it's great to have you back on. So how have you been?
Yeah, it's great to be back. I've been fine, just working on a lot of music.
Yeah, do you find that you spend more time writing, or you actually working on a lot of different things? Have you performed lately, or are you primarily just like writing in a writing mode?
I haven't performed as much as I used to. I still try to do it as much as I can, both
Hmm.
through social media and also through local pubs and clubs. But for the most part, the focus has been on the writing.
Yeah, writing. Because of the pandemic, I spent a lot of time writing, and I've talked to a lot of musicians that we kind of had the space to do something that maybe a lot of times artists we don't, because like musicians we typically have to tour because the way the industry doesn't pay us, so we have to do shows and we have to do merch and we have to do all these things. They kind of take away from writing. And
Yeah.
so this time, I know it's been tragic for a lot of people, but I spent a lot of time being able to write. So did you find that that's why you were writing, or do you had the motivation because you had a project you wanted to work on anyway?
I think the pandemic and the lockdown, just not having anything else to do, was a big push for me to focus on writing more. And also, it was around the end of the pandemic, actually, that I decided, because I had this project in my head for a really long time to write a musical. And then finally, at the end, I was determined and I said, okay, I'm going to do it because I don't know when this pandemic is going to end. So I may as well just get started on it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a really ambitious idea. It's like I think a lot of people today are kind of like, how are we going to connect with the audiences? Like, a lot of times we have to use visuals. People are using TikTok, they're using Reels, and then going into an idea of like theater. Even go back to the Who with Tommy. They were like, oh, we can do rock opera. We can do this multimedia thing. We don't have to just do hit singles. And actually, it was
Yeah.
kind of like P Town was running into a wall. It was like, I can't keep on writing singles. I'm not really a singles artist. I'm a concept artist. So did you
Yeah.
feel like, because you like albums and you like the idea of a play, that fit better what you like to write about anyway as a musician?
Yeah, I think I really like the idea of writing a long piece rather than just one single, because I feel like when you're writing a play like that, then you can do a lot more with the lyrics and the music, because then you can also refer back to previous melodies or lyrics and tell the story a lot better in that way, something that a single couldn't do.
Yeah, I've always liked the album format. I've gone on and on being a child of the 70s, grew up with vinyl. When I approached an album, because I put it on the turntable, I didn't jump around. I didn't just listen to a playlist. I listened to the whole thing through. And I like the
Yeah.
idea when people have albums, even if they're not a concept, they usually have songs that go together. And it's
Yeah.
really, I always was very interested in albums that did have themes. Um, so the idea of having a project, actual like a play, is actually really, so maybe you can talk more about that. But I do have your single. So before we get deeper into that, I will bring that up so we can actually show everybody what your latest song is. So I'm going to pull that up now and set it up, and then once we're going to play the full length of it, and then we'll go into I'll put you on mute and we'll go back and talk about the theater project. Is that cool?
Yep. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So this is Midnight Train. Kick it off now.
Gray midnight, alone in a train car, passing by towns I never heard of, and I was holding on without a stop inside. You stepped in the green afternoon rush. I was frozen blue until your time spent the summer there. Home was far away. I've said too much on my mind. Your words were short and to the point. I imagine that's how the gods must speak, and I almost bought your black and white world, your Anubis scale, until I remembered who I was. Thank you for the sunshine, thank you for the rain, for stepping through that door. Leave me lying on the floor. Thank you for the lessons, teaching me what love is, for all the stolen moments on the midnight And that's just a story of how once you had me, until your words cut through the scars they once stitched up. It's okay, I'm better off alone, and one day I'll find the one who's worth it, and I'll get
We're back, and that was Midnight Train. So yeah, I love the instrumentation on it, and the drums and the guitar. And there are other
Oh, thank
instruments
you.
on it. Is it not just a guitar? Is it something else? Is there
Yeah,
something beyond the guitar?
there's a cello in the background as well,
Yeah, yeah.
and some
I heard.
violins. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a really nice orchestration there, and that's all like some of your friends came in, or you were able to get producers to help you with that.
It was actually all just me.
Oh, you all did it. You did it. Yeah, maybe we ought
Yeah.
to focus on your multi-instrumentation. So maybe you can talk about that song and like, so you played all those parts?
Yeah, so actually, I wrote it all with a keyboard. So I was playing them all on the piano and
Hmm.
then putting it through Logic and then getting the
Okay.
instruments that way.
Yeah, that's the thing I love about synthesis is learning how to play like a cello player would play, or playing like a flute. Like I
Yeah,
actually started on clarinet, and so I realized if I play a clarinet on a synth, I shouldn't play endlessly. I should actually
yeah,
leave room for breaths. And if you think about you're playing a cello, you probably should think about how you would actually use the bow. And you
yeah,
probably keyboard you can keep on playing, like, and not think about, oh, I'm actually using bow. Maybe I should try to bring those characteristics into when I try to play. But I think that's
yeah.
just part of the development when you realize that you can channel other instruments. That was always one of the things I first got into. But so it is super convenient when you're a songwriter, the fact that you can actually do everything if you can imagine it and you can play it. So have you gotten more comfortable with channeling other instruments besides guitar?
Yeah, so actually, I used to play the violin before I even got started on the guitar. So that's why I like to, when I'm writing music, I like to focus a lot on the string section because I feel like that's the area that I know best. But yeah, also experimenting with different instruments has been really fun, I think, because of course I have never played any sort of brass instruments or even held a brass instrument, but I can play them through a keyboard, which is, I think, really cool.
Yeah, that's like one of the things I loved about when I was in a band, and then everybody started walking away, and then I said, "Whoa, how am I going to do the drums? How am I going to do the bass?" And then I found a synthesizer that was like a workstation, and this is before DAWs. And I was like, "Oh, I can use this workstation to like do what people do in DAWs today." But that's like, back in the day, people used Phantoms and Korg M1s and stuff like that. And I was always, I'm 55, so that's why my history was, oh, I can get these workstations, and that was like the DAW of our time, to be able
Yeah,
to go on a workstation and actually play all the parts. So the DAW is even more convenient, and that allows you to do that, without
yeah,
having to be on a Korg or a Roland or like Yamaha, you can actually do whatever you pick, whatever plugin you want. But so we maybe going to segue into your project. Is this song part of that project, or is this separate from the project, the theater
So
project?
this is actually separate from it, and for a long time I hadn't written anything separate from that project. But this song, it just, when I felt the inspiration for it, I just knew I had to write it down. So I actually took a small break from the theater project and did this.
Yeah, that tends to happen because like as an artist, like you're in the middle of like something bigger, and then it's like, oh, something comes and maybe it doesn't fit what you're working on, but it's, oh, this is exciting. I could actually do this. And I find myself sometimes doing that. I'll be working on these albums because I'm kind of album oriented. And then I'll like, oh, this is a song that doesn't fit, but it's cool.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I'll put this out as a single, and I'll just go and do it because like, oh, it just came to me. It's like I like it. It feels urgent. It feels like I should put it out.
Yeah.
So as like a songwriter, sometimes you get something that's like, oh, this is like now. So I need to put this out now. Yeah. That how
You
it
just
felt.
need to get the ideas down.
Yeah, because sometimes you have something like, well, I don't want to wait to the next thing. I don't want to wait till I'm done with the theater. But so you're like, oh, I got to put this out because it feels relevant to where I am and what I want to convey. So that's always exciting. But maybe you can talk more about the whole Beowulf project and the musical play that you're working on.
Yes. So this idea I had, I think it was sometime last year. I've always wanted to write a musical because I love musicals. I love the idea of telling a story through music. And also, like we were saying about concept albums and longer projects, you get the option to really tell a story in a way that a single couldn't do because you get to work with multiple songs who can refer to each other. And so that's why I knew I wanted to write a musical for a really long time. But I just couldn't decide what exactly I wanted to write it on. I knew I wanted it to be something medieval because I did my master's in medieval studies. So I knew that that was the storyline that I wanted to follow. But for a really long time, I thought Beowulf wouldn't work for a musical. But then I actually sat down and wrote down all my ideas and started looking more into the text and more into the scholarship around it and the stories that it has spawned. And I thought, actually, there's a lot of material here to cover. So,
well, I think it's really cool that you're picking it because a lot of people, they pick the Iliad or the Odyssey or some Shakespearean concept and they kind of replicate it over and over again in like a lot of work done today. I don't remember hearing people taking Beowulf as much and using it or not using it exactly in music either. So I think that's cool that you found something classic that is not been used in that way. So it becomes something unique, but something classic. I think that's a cool way to think of modern concept.
yeah.
Start back to some really old like samurai. Ask the people. Hello, can you hear me?
It was a bit cutting at some parts. I couldn't quite hear you. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that there's been a. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if there was a glitch on the Wi-Fi, but what I was saying is some even filmmakers will go back and use like classic tales. I think they use like Kurosawa was used for like Star Wars, like samurai tales from Kurosawa. Like inspire people use like the Knights of the Round Table. People use the Iliad. People use the Odyssey. People use Shakespearean plays. Romeo and Juliet gets completed in modern day romance multiple. I haven't really heard of Beowulf being used to the degree like Romeo and Juliet is used a lot. People use it all the time as a way to make it a tighter script because you can follow something that already existed. But I think it's cool to actually bring something from the past forward with like a new take on it. So maybe you can talk about
Yeah.
how your interpretation is, like your own vision for it.
Yeah, so actually, back when I was doing my master's, I focused on Anglo-Saxon storytelling. So the idea was to take the story, when I was writing my musical, to take the story and retell it, but this time put my own narrative spin on it. And I have added some of the plot points from a different text called Gesta Danorum that actually deals with one of the minor characters in Beowulf. And I thought that was really interesting because that character's story is barely mentioned in Beowulf, but then in Gesta Danorum we have a little bit more. So I thought it would be interesting to merge those two narratives as well. And of course, add a bit of my own commentary on it, because Beowulf, the text, the presence of the narrator is very strong in the poem. The narrator tends to come in and make comments a lot. And I thought I wanted to do that too, but this time it would be my narrator who was making these comments.
Oh, that's interesting. It's cool to take a different variations and then add that like elaboration on that character. I think that's a cool take on it because then it kind of makes it uniquely your interpretation, your vision, or how you see it. So the world will get like how you've interpreted it, and I think that's art. I mean, that's the way things are. I think as a musician, finding other means to inspire us is always like the thing. Like every time we write as musicians, I think we always pull from the things that we're interested in, or our life
Yeah.
experiences, or the reflections of what's moving us in our subconscious. And here you actually have a something that's really the core that is going to make this theater play. So are you going to actually do an album to go with it? Is it multimedia, or is it folk just going to be the play?
Yeah. So once all the writing process is done and once I get a cast together, I am hoping to make an album as well. But of course, it is an album. It is a play first and then an album second.
Hmm. So with the music, is the music going to be a part of the theater? Like, will you write like songs that you're actually going to have songs on stage being sung by the actors and people
Yeah.
doing the play? So it'll be that kind of idea
Yeah.
of a like a Tommy in a way, but maybe this the people rock operas in theater. That was like the known music first example of a band actually doing that, and then it became a film. And actually, I would think it was been done on off Broadway too. So we have an example with what the Who did. But would you actually even look at what the Who did, or just say, "Well, I'm going to do it a different way"?
Mm, I like to take inspiration mostly from musicals that are written for the stage specifically.
Hmm.
So, but also adding a bit of my own spin on it with the inclusion of a narrator and how that interacts with the rest of the story.
So it'll be more classic, like a real classical theater construction, rather than being like a rock opera, which wasn't really was kind of Townsend's idea of his Tommy character was not based on anything that had happened in classic literature. Is something he created. Where your version is like you're actually doing something like the Iliad or the Odyssey with Beowulf. You have a classic tale, like an epic
Yeah.
poem that you're turning into an actual theater event.
Yeah. And also a lot of characters that go along with it. So
Oh, so it's
it
going to
wouldn't
expand
just
it.
be me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's going to expand it so it actually has like the theater effect. Because of
Yeah.
epic poem, it's not a play, it's a poem. So to take the epic poem and translate, it's kind of like when you take a poem and turn it into song lyrics. Is there a lot of work in terms of taking an epic poem and then turning it into a theater event and also turning it into songs? Because like poems aren't exactly the structure of songs. So what's been your approach to that?
So the great thing about Beowulf and Anglo-Saxon literature in general is that they were probably intended to be performed as they were. So that is something that is always in the background when I'm thinking about how I'm going to write this, because the poem itself talks a lot about characters who are singing. So singing was very much a part of life for these characters.
Mhm.
And I think that makes it really interesting from a musical perspective, because of course, most of the time with a musical, you got characters that wouldn't be singing in real life, but they
Yeah,
are
that
singing
wouldn't
their
happen.
dialogues.
Yeah.
Whereas with this, it makes sense for a lot of the characters to be singing when they are singing.
Oh, because the story actually has them singing or implies they're singing.
Yeah,
So it's actually going to be more natural to actually have that on stage because it's part of the overall concept of Beowulf versus when
yeah,
you have something else where you actually, make, Hollywood musicals or even, American musicals always seem like, Oklahoma is like, wow, they're just singing all that out. And I'm like, it seems kind of it seems kind of weird. And you're like, okay, that works in that world. They have to kind of have suspension of disbelief and say,
yeah.
okay, that works. But it seems like your concept is going to be closer to not seeming that it's that far off from the original idea.
Yeah, like there are some points where a certain level of suspension of disbelief is necessary, because we have the narrator who is every once in a while just coming in and making little comments, maybe talking to the audience directly, and
Hmm.
always reminding us that this is a story and these characters are fictional. So we have that layer as well, as the
Hmm.
characters just naturally
It's
singing in their
interesting,
life.
like how that would fit in an album. Cause like I've heard albums where they actually, do rock opera type things, and they have like a narration. They'll actually have a character that will be like the third person talking as the narrator. Um, so you already have, who that's going to be in your concept. You've already decided you're going to use that. That, you explained that, right?
Yeah, so I feel there are a lot of musicals who have a sort of narrator, but not quite. So, for example, with Hamilton, the character of Burr, even though he's a character in the story, he also does a lot of the narrating throughout the songs. But in my case, I actually have a character that is specifically just the narrator and isn't a part of the story at all.
Oh
They're
wow, he
just there to tell
separated
the
it out.
story.
Oh, he pulled it out in your
Yeah,
version. I think that's cool to do that because it makes it uniquely yours, and then it gives you some ability to kind of focus the story the way you want it. How
yeah,
you view the story, then you can kind of don't have to be stuck to like doing exactly what was done. Some people get into like interpretation. I want to have a literal interpretation of everything about this and not add other things to maybe make it work better. You know,
yeah,
so I think it's like when you start because you're doing some unique things in terms of like it's a musical, it's an epic poem, but it had music in it, and then you have this narration, and you're gonna do like an outside narration that wasn't part of the original concept, plus a different variation of a deeper dive into a character. So it makes it really interesting. Makes me want to go see it right now. But how long do you think this overall? You've been working on it. Are you closer to it becoming like totally in fruition? With the I think you mentioned off camera that you're working with like theater company and stuff like that. So can you tell people what the target for this is?
So yes, I'm hoping to finish this by the end of this year, because there's not much left to write at all, and then it's about going back through the drafts and polishing everything, and then it's actually going to be thinking about casting and where to stage it and all of those things that go with a theatre
Yeah.
production. So that's
So it
exciting
would
and
be it
something
would
I'm
be
really
in the
looking
U.
forward to.
Do you have like a place in the UK where you think it would be like they would want to do this? Like, is it London or where you are now? Like, where do you think you would actually put it on?
So I'm thinking local first, because I want to really polish it, because I feel like there are certain things that you don't catch when
Hmm.
you're just writing, and then you actually start to see them when you see actual people play out the scenes.
Yeah, that makes
Oh yeah,
sense.
I want to do a smaller run first before I take it any further, and then see
So
how
you have a
that goes.
local play company do it like in a local area before you hit the big UK market for.
Yeah,
So is London the place that plays are done in the UK, or is it a different place?
yeah, it's London.
But
So that's the
yeah,
ultimate goal, of course.
so it's kind of like New York, London, like New York for plays, I guess.
Yeah.
Would you ever imagine trying to take it off Broadway to New York? Like if you get really good feedback, is this something you think would this stay in the UK? Or would you bring it on the road and bring it to the US or bring it to France or bring it to Germany, bring it to other places?
I mean, bringing it to Broadway would be amazing because, of course, all of my favorite musicals and the ones that I look up to are all happening in Broadway. So I think someday down the line, I would really hope for that to be possible for my play as well.
Yeah, that's like the end goal. Like, for all,
Yeah.
New York for like multiple things. Like, just like for me, like growing up, it was like the CBGB scene was like, it's not around anymore, but that was like the place where the Talking Heads, the Ramones. It's kind of like, New York and Los Angeles for musicians are like the two big points you want to go to. Nashville's there too, but I'm kind of the artist. I would go to New York, and I go to LA before, and then maybe I go to Nashville like third. But some people are like, "Oh, you shouldn't say that," but that's my mindset. But yeah, I can understand for the theater. I've been there for off Broadway shows. I saw Death of a Salesman, and I was like, "Wow, this like that whole scene is so cool." To be able to be there and drink in New York and you have the restaurants and the whole scene. It's a really good experience to be in that culture of like all these artists.
Yeah.
And there's like, it's musicians and actors and all types of people. It's just very inspiring to be in a place like that.
Yeah.
So I can imagine like, yeah, if you could bring Beowulf there with your interpretation, that'd be fantastic. Plus it's close to,
Yeah.
it's like only 5 hours from where I am. So I can actually see it. Selfish reason, I want to see it, so I could, then I could actually see the play. But so is this your total focus is on this, or do you think you'd be doing some more singles like Midnight Train? Do you think you'll throw a couple singles in there between this, or that was just like
So I think there might be a few more singles like Midnight Train because the reason I actually was kind of hesitant at first with Midnight Train was because I was obviously working on this big project and that was my entire focus. And I did have a few other ideas, and I had an idea for an album for myself rather than for a theatre. And for a while, I had been getting ideas for it, writing them down, but not actually doing anything because, of course, all the focus had to be on the writing. And Midnight Train was actually one of those ideas. But this time I just said, I actually really want to do this song. And it would be good to take a break from this long writing project because I feel like sometimes taking a break and doing something very different actually helps with inspiration a lot. So there are a few other songs that I have in mind that are similar to Midnight Train, but not part of the musical.
yeah, I find that I'll work on multiple things and then I'll take a break. Like I'll be working on a long project that might, like a
Yeah.
2 year album. And I got like two albums in the can. And then I got this really big album I put out and I'm like, well, I got to give that room for people to hear. So I got these other albums I have sitting in the can and then I'm writing new stuff. And then I'm like, well, do I really want to hold back? Because I got stuff planned out to 2023 and 2024.
Yeah.
And then like, well, I actually this song's in my head right now, so it's kind of like my Midnight Train's like I gotta put this out like now, even though I've
Yeah.
got stuff planned out. I'm like, oh, well, I'm gonna put some unplanned stuff out because I just if you start holding so much stuff and then you're still trying to let your other project get heard, that's why I end up not wanting to stomp on the success of something I just put out. Because I keep
Yeah.
on writing and I don't stop. Do you find that like you have so much work sometimes that then like you want to put it out, but you've got to actually let your other work be heard by your audience?
Yeah, I think, especially with Beowulf, the musical, there are a lot of songs in there that I want to actually record and put out, but I'm like, no, actually, just I've only put out one from Beowulf so far, and I'm telling myself, no, like keep them, and then once it's all done, then they can all go out. But it's really hard to contain them sometimes because you just want them
Yeah,
out.
yeah. I mean, I had a hard time. I was holding stuff for like 2 years for the last project, and I was like, I had all these songs. I'm like, they were like some of the best things I'd ever written, and I'm like, and then I write something new, and it wasn't as good as what I have in the can. But like, oh, I actually have a release date for this. Don't put it out yet unless it's a single. And so, yeah, it just becomes like you're competing with yourself. And you're like, oh, well, what should I put out? What shouldn't I put out? So then, I do have like a process where I throw demos out onto SoundCloud. And so I can get people to like, and those aren't officially released. They're kind of like underground release stuff, like mixtape type stuff. Have you ever thought of like trying to throw things into like a kind of like underground area just to see what the feedback is, like a mixtape type
So
of idea?
I've been doing something a bit similar with the whole Beowulf writing because I've essentially been recording the process of me writing and coming up with ideas on TikToks, and I have been sharing snippets from songs rather than the entire song so that I can still have a feel for what people think of it and also show people kind of as a teaser of what is
Mhm.
to come.
That's a cool idea. I mean, I've been using Reels, and I've always had trouble with TikTok trying to engage it. And I do see, because I've been so like the primary audience seems to be into a lot of comedy. But I do
Yeah,
see there's a lot of musicians on there that are just doing it straight. They're doing like, okay, I'm actually putting my song, it's a song. I'm not trying to do a sketch. Right. So
yeah,
so it's kind of like, problem I had with it originally was like, oh, it seems like I have to do a sketch to really get a lot of engagement. It has to be comedy or it has to be kind of irreverent.
mm,
And then I realized that you can actually still put music out in it, and you're not trying to
yeah,
compete with those kind of the comedic part of it. And that I kind of
yeah,
finally kind of came to terms with, like, well, I'm never probably going to be one of those comedians, but I can still engage on the platform. you know,
yeah. And I think it's a lot of just finding your own people on there because for me, even before I started writing for Beowulf, I had always been posting content about, Anglo-Saxon literature or medieval literature and history in general. So I already had a lot of people who were interested in that. And that was, I think, really lucky for me because, of course, that's something that I'm interested in and something that I enjoy talking about. So with Beowulf, that also ties into the same kind of demographic, I think.
that's cool that you can bring those people into multiple platforms and be out there. So one of the things I started looking into is that the podcast has been like a big thing for me to engage my audience and to allow other people to see emerging artists. Have you thought of like using podcast to like tell your story, like a behind the music of what you're doing with Beowulf? Would you ever think of like doing a podcast to actually push out the whole idea of what you're doing with the theater project?
Yeah, I have thought about it, but I feel like, for me at least, doing a podcast would be quite a long project as opposed to, say, a 2-minute TikTok where I'm
Hmm.
still talking about like the process behind it, but maybe not as in depth as a podcast would allow. And I
Yeah,
think, especially
it's
with
short.
social media nowadays, that's the short form content is what performs
Well,
best.
yeah, even like a YouTube short, like the YouTube short
Yeah,
format with the reel and with TikTok might work better for you than trying to do like a long form podcast. Since that
yeah,
sounds like the YouTube short, I started to looking at YouTube shorts. I haven't really been able to engage my audience because a lot of my audience likes my longer form stuff. So when I do the shorter stuff, I don't get a lot of engagement. So
mm,
it's like the opposite of what people say it should work. It doesn't
yeah,
work for me. But
yeah. It's all about
it seems
audience, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, but I do see how that, that short form and the reel and the TikTok, that makes a lot of sense. If you don't want to have to put all the extra time in, you're still giving people like that behind the music, behind the scenes thing, which, is
Yeah.
more doable. It must be a lot more manageable when you're working on so much stuff that
Yeah.
you don't have to think about like all the things you would have to set up to do a longer form.
Yeah, I feel like with TikTok, if I say I'm writing a song and then I want to talk about a certain thing that I just did, I can just pick up my phone and record a very quick video. Whereas I feel like for a podcast, it takes a lot of planning and a lot of structure
Yeah,
as opposed to
yeah.
the sudden.
Yeah, because now you have to get it out there. You got to set it up. There's a lot more setup on these podcasts. You have to do a lot. You have to write descriptions. You have to
Yeah,
set the channels. You have to do all these things. We're starting to be able to actually get, we get sponsors, we get advertising, we get all kinds of things to help push them out. Um, so it's a lot more effort. There's a lot more stuff going on. It used to be like when I first started, it was just on the phone. And there are some podcast platforms that are still like that, but like there's a couple of them, like one called Wisdom. It's on the phone and it goes live, and then you can just talk to people off the cuff, and that's kind of cool. But it doesn't have a lot of connections. You can't hook up URLs, or you can't like show pictures, and so there's a lot of like engagement with the video world. Is like you need to actually show like a video. You need to be able
yeah,
to show a photo. It's very important, be able to have your URL so people can get, connect to what you want them to look at. And so,
yeah,
yeah, that's why I got out of like audio only podcasting into video, because I needed the engagement and also to be able to talk to the people like yourself, and to show your music video, or to, show artwork. When I'm talking to a painter or something, it's a lot easier when you're talking to a visual artist to actually show the visual medium.
yeah,
But yeah, I do think audio only is cool for some things. It's still, there's still a lot of engagement on the audio
yeah,
only type of
definitely.
platforms, but video is kind of here to stay. It's kind of changed a lot. So what are
Yeah.
your thoughts of like the theater? Are you going to film it? Like if you do the plays, would somebody professionally film it, or would you let it just be point in time, or would you do you have an idea that you would ever film it?
I think I would like to film it at some point because the issue with theatre is if it's just very local, then you don't get to have a very wide audience. Maybe there will be people who are not going to be able to travel here, or who are all around the world who wouldn't be able to see it otherwise unless it's filmed. So I
Hmm.
think filming it eventually would be something I would like to do.
Yeah, it just seems like, because otherwise it becomes a point in time kind of happening thing, and
Yeah,
and that's the kind of like, the draw of it in New York is that you do get people, but they tend to even film those. Like even when you're in New
yeah,
York, a film company comes in, and usually will film like the best takes and then put it out, or put the whole thing out. Um, So yeah, it just seems like, given the visual nature of everybody today, that would be cool to even if you clipped it like on TikTok or Reels,
yeah,
so people saw pieces of it, that might, work to still push out the idea until you could get
yeah.
somebody to fully film it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's all about building up the audience, I think.
Yeah, that's always the audience engagement. But you think with theater, do you feel like you'll have a wider impact, or a more potential for success? Because like we're living in the age of the 2 minute song. We're
Yeah,
living of like the playlist type of thing, and this is a way longer form project, and it's a different type of audience, I think, that gets engaged by something that like you're working on. Like it's a longer idea. So what do you feel about that? Because we're in a world where a lot of like managers and stuff will be, oh well, what's big today is the 2.3 minute song.
yeah. I think there is still a very big audience for theatre because at the end of the day, there is something in musical theatre and theatre in general that singles or 2-minute songs simply cannot capture. And that's why I think even if it's not what is the most popular, it's still going to continue having a big fan base.
Yeah, you have a niche. It's like a niche. It's like progressive rock, the stuff I do. I do like 12-minute, 15-minute songs. Everybody says, "Oh, you should," you're not going to get any engagement. But I get a core audience that still likes that. A lot of
Yeah.
people, like, they were children of the 70s. We grew up with the Led Zeppelins and the Pink Floyds and, the Genesis and the Yes bands, and people like that. They wanted to see that.
Yeah.
So when I go to a place and I play like that, there's a whole audience that remembers Funkadelic, they remember Pink Floyd, and they like to see that they still playing like that. And so, yeah, I think there are niche audiences for everything, and you can end up being. Now, maybe I'm not going to get the engagement that the banger song gets in the clubs, but I get a different audience that appreciates what I'm doing. So I think you'll get that theater audience that will appreciate Beowulf. They'll appreciate what you're doing and the fact that you're into that type of work and that you're reimagining it. And I think that will bring excitement. And I think it'll bring the audience that want to see that.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I really believe that it's possible to do, more, these type of projects that, if you talk to certain people, they be, well, why would you do that? Because you need to do the maximum, max. That's not about maximum. It's about what you want to do as an artist, right? Oh, maybe you didn't hear me. Did it cut out again?
Yeah, a bit.
Okay. What I'm saying is, like, not everything is about trying to hit the maximum audience. Like, it's a lot of times, like, if you're an artist, you're trying to do something that you think is artistically vital, that interests you, and you might have a niche. And then people say, well, that's a small niche, but you could still engage and do something phenomenal in that niche. And just because it's not going to cross into like a mega type of thing doesn't mean it's not worth doing. That's why I always have to explain to people is, like, sometimes you don't always have to be trying to hit the top 20 or the top 10. That's the whole thing about an indie or emerging or alternate type of artist. Like a folk artist, they're not going to hit the audience that a hip hop artist, because that's what's happening, right? But the guy is like a new wave guy is not going to get that EDM trap art audience to come in as heavy, because that was an old form, so, but that doesn't mean that you can't still have engagement or do something that's really interesting in that genre. You don't always have to be, I think that's what people have, let art be what it is.
Yeah, and if anything, I feel like trying to fit into what is popular now can actually be very detrimental for creativity, because I feel like everyone has their own style, and what type of art that they will produce is, because I feel like art is very personal. So trying to create something for the sake of it being popular isn't going to put out your best work, I feel.
Yeah, that's what I've always felt, is like I've had this idea about expansive sound, which is the idea that you have cross genre, funk and jazz and rock and punk all kind of slammed together, like the people I always grew up liking, I loved like Neil Young and Crazy Horse, because he from doing like something really beautiful like Heart of Gold and do this kind of punk. He was like the grandfather of grunge. He was doing this very heavy punk thing, and he didn't care if his voice was totally in tune. He went off and did it, and bands like the Clash and the Sex Pistols and the Ramones, they're like, he's like our grandfather. He's the one that came up with it, because I think it's just like sometimes it's like, and he went off and did things that didn't make as much money. Some of those Crazy Horse albums didn't make the money that Harvest did, but he just did it because that's where his head was. That's where he wanted to go.
Yeah, and I think that's what art should really be about, because like no one else is going to produce the same art that you are going to, so you may as well do what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like sometimes, like, as an artist, it's like the people that want to put you on a track will say, like, take your song that you did the best effort with. Let's say you had a song that reached 2 million people. They just want you to keep on redoing that over and over and over. And then, like, what do you end up doing? You end up having to play that song every night for the rest of your life. And you
Yeah.
probably are way beyond it. By the time you play it for the 100th time, it's like, I'm beyond this. I don't want to do that. And I think that's just like, do you want to do art because you love it, or are you just trying to monetize your art?
Yeah.
I think there's a point, like, yeah, you want to live well from what you do, but a lot of times it's like, I think as musicians and artists, we do things because we believe in it. We do things
Yeah,
because we
definitely.
love it, right? And you can do it whether it's going to be top 10 or top bottom 1,000. You don't care. It's like, I'm doing it because that's what I
Yeah.
believe in at the moment, right?
Yeah. And that all comes back down to art being such a personal thing, because it matters more that it truly represents what you want to do, I think.
I think your audience finds you. What I've found is, like,
Yeah.
when people do what they believe in, then the audience will find it. Like, even like you got a band, like I always point out, is like the Velvet Underground. All these, at the time they didn't make it commercially, but all these producers and singer songwriters listened to them, and they became like a gold standard of, like, what alternative should be, like what indie rock, college radio, what a lot of bands ended up becoming, because Lou Reed and the Velvet and Andy Warhol were willing to just do art for art's sake.
Yeah.
And then people were like, wow, I can talk about other things besides, like, romance in my music. I could actually talk
Yeah.
about the dark underbelly in New York. I could be like a writer. I mean, the thing about Lou was he's a poet, and he's bringing, like, these epic poems about, like, the dark underbelly in New York into music. And it's not like a romance song. It's not like, oh, I lost my girlfriend. It's something else. And in most of his work, you can just read it, and it's a classic poem. It's a modern kind of poem. He's like a beat poet, and the fact that he put that out there made a lot of other artists believe, I can do that, or I can come from that point of view. And I think
Yeah.
that's what's worth about doing what you feel as a writer,
Yeah.
as an artist. You can build a whole. He built a whole genre just because he believed in poetry.
Yeah, because like you said, your audience will find you. And if you're just doing what is popular at the moment, then trends change. And that's not the same kind of personal connection that you will have with your audience if you're only focusing on trends.
Yeah, there's classic stuff today. A lot of bands today are probably unknown that somebody's going to find, and they'll be the next
Yeah.
Velvet Underground. And because they were willing to put it down, people rediscover them, all the time. I ran to Alex Chilton's Big Star, and that was
Yeah.
an unknown band that inspired, Counting Crows, inspired Replacements, it inspired tons of other bands, Wilco, Radiohead, tons of bands, like, will name check Alex Chilton. And people, he had a song when he was a kid. He was 17. He was in the Box Toppers. He did the famous song called "The Letter," and then he created Big Star. Big Star was totally different than what he had done as, he was doing Blue Eyed Soul as in the Box Tops, and he went to this Beatle-esque kind of Badfinger clone, but it wasn't Badfinger, and it wasn't the Beatles. It was something else. And
Yeah.
and that art has survived so classic to this day. People listen to 13, people listen to all these songs, and it didn't really kick in its time. But no, it's nice. I have a cat too. I mean, my cat Mina would love your cat. But yeah, I think it's just interesting I think it's like, I'll tell people about William Blake. William Blake is one of the greatest Victorian poets, and he wasn't known in his time. And you too, name check songs of innocence and experience, and name checking them. You see how far that somebody's art can go. That's because William Blake believed in it. He did all that stuff on acid sketches on metal,
Yeah.
and people found those plates. And then even today, his poetry resonates among many different types of artists.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of artists like that who maybe weren't as popular in their time, and I think Van Gogh is one of them as well. And yet today, when we think about them, we think of them as being timeless, because when they were doing their art, they were thinking about putting out what is true for them.
Yeah, I think that's what's great about what you're doing with Beowulf, because that's like a truth. It's a classic thing, and your interpretation. It's that I think that's a really positive outcome today when you have a lot of people that are into kind of cloning or into like chasing monetization or chasing the dollar, or chasing like what they think is going to be popular, rather than doing what is heart popular. Like what's popular inside your heart. Like what's actually, you look in the looking glass and say, is this me? Is this my authentic me? Am I really
Yeah.
doing my best work, or am I trying to keep up with the Joneses? You know, I don't think keeping up with the Joneses is actually your best work. I think actually looking into yourself and finding some truth. That's how you get to the best work.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
Like,
I really. So, you have anything you want to tell your fans about anything that's coming up that you're doing that they need to know about?
at the moment, no.
No
Just
shows or anything.
regular. Yeah.
Just working on. You have your single out there. You have your link tree. You can get to everything that's about you there. We want encourage everybody to go to your YouTube, subscribe to your YouTube, go to your Spotify, go to all your social media, and make sure that you like and subscribe anywhere you can. I have to tell people all this all the time. If you like an artist, don't just keep on listening to the video on YouTube or watching it and never hit the subscribe button. People get, credit for you subscribing. So I'm always, if you're gonna sit there and listen to it, then take the time to actually hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the download button. If you really want to support people, buy the album where you can buy it and download it. That's very important to artists, and sometimes people forget the amount of work that goes into music, and it is really cool if you actually push it forward and subscribe, download, purchase, and support the artists we talk to.
Yeah.
Thank you for having another chat with us. I was very happy to see you continuing on Beowulf. I know we talked about it before, and I feel really excited that it's getting closer.
Yeah. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank
Or
you,
night.
and you too.
By nighttime
Yeah.
for you. Bye.